In 1932, Australia found itself in a battle so strange it seemed destined to be remembered as a historical curiosity. The enemy wasn't an invading army, nor was it some domestic uprising. It was a horde of emus, the large, flightless birds native to the continent. This peculiar conflict, known as the Great Emu War, began in the rural farmlands of Western Australia, where the challenges of the Great Depression were already weighing heavily on the nation. Farmers, struggling to cultivate crops in an unforgiving environment, suddenly found their efforts under siege from an unexpected adversary. The events leading to this unusual war were tied to a combination of human expansion and nature's unpredictability. During the late 1920s and early 1930s, Australian veterans of World War I were encouraged to settle on agricultural land as part of a government initiative aimed at bolstering food production and providing livelihoods for returning soldiers. These settlement programs, while well-intentioned, placed the farmers in challenging conditions. Western Australia's soil was tough, the climate was harsh, and the global economic downturn had driven wheat prices into the ground. Farmers were desperate, but despite their struggles, they were determined to make it work. Enter the emus. These impressive creatures, standing nearly 6 feet tall and capable of running at speeds up to 50 kilometers per hour, are icons of Australia's unique wildlife. Normally nomadic, emus migrate across the land in search of food and water. In 1932, their seasonal migration brought them to the wheat fields of Western Australia, where they found an unexpected paradise. With plenty of food and a habitat seemingly designed for their needs, tens of thousands of emus descended on the farmland. The birds, while fascinating to observe, were a nightmare for the farmers. They trampled fences, devastated crops, and consumed whatever they could find. Initially, farmers tried to fend off the birds on their own. They constructed barriers, attempted to scare the emus away, and even hunted them. But their efforts were no match for the sheer number of birds. Emus are resilient animals with tough feathers and strong bodies, making them difficult to harm with conventional weapons. As the damage to crops mounted, so did the frustration of the farmers. Many of them were barely scraping by as it was. The arrival of the emus felt like the final straw. Desperate for help, the farmers turned to the Australian government. They petitioned for assistance, framing the emu invasion as a national emergency. Their pleas reached the ears of Sir George Pearce, Australia's Minister of Defence. Pearce, a pragmatic politician with a strong belief in decisive action, agreed that something had to be done. He proposed a military intervention, a solution that seemed both bold and, to some, a little absurd. The plan was straightforward: deploy soldiers armed with machine guns to Western Australia to deal with the emu problem. The decision wasn't entirely without precedent. In the years following World War I, the Australian military had occasionally been called upon to assist with domestic issues, particularly in rural areas. To Pearce, this was just another instance of the military stepping in to support the nation. To the farmers, it was a lifeline, a chance to save their livelihoods before the emus consumed everything. In November 1932, the operation began. Major G.P.W. Meredith of the Royal Australian Artillery was put in charge of the mission. He and his team arrived in the affected region with 2 Lewis machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. The farmers watched with anticipation as the soldiers prepared to take on the feathered invaders. There was a sense of optimism in the air, a belief that this intervention would finally bring the crisis under control. Yet, as the days unfolded, it became clear that the emus were not going to be easy targets. They moved in large flocks, but quickly scattered at the first sign of danger, making them difficult to hit. Their speed and agility turned the open fields into a battlefield where the birds held the upper hand. Even when the soldiers managed to get close, the emu's tough plumage often deflected bullets. The initial skirmishes yielded few victories for the humans, and word began to spread that the emus were proving to be formidable opponents. For the farmers, watching the military struggle against a flock of birds was disheartening. For the soldiers, it was downright embarrassing. They had entered the operation expecting a quick and decisive victory, but found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. Major Meredith later remarked on the emus' remarkable abilities, comparing them to guerrilla fighters who knew the terrain better than their opponents. Despite the setbacks, the operation continued for several weeks, with sporadic success. A few hundred emus were killed, but the overall population remained largely unaffected. The birds simply adapted to the humans' tactics, finding new ways to evade capture and attack. For every small victory, there were countless failures. The Great Emu War would eventually become a story of human determination met with the unyielding force of nature. What began as a desperate bid to protect farmland turned into a spectacle that highlighted the unpredictability of life in the Australian outback. For the farmers, it was a reminder of the challenges they faced every day. For the soldiers, it was an unexpected lesson in humility. For the emus, it was just another migration, though one that would secure their place in history. When the soldiers arrived in Western Australia, armed with 2 Lewis machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition, there was an air of anticipation. The farmers welcomed them with a mix of relief and curiosity. These were battle-hardened men from the Australian military, tasked with eliminating the emus that had been wreaking havoc on their land. Surely, a few large birds couldn't stand a chance against the might of modern weaponry. The plan seemed straightforward: locate the emu flocks, unleash the firepower, and restore order to the farmlands. However, the simplicity of the plan belied the complexity of the task at hand. The first operation commenced near Campion, where a large group of emus had been sighted. The soldiers set up their machine guns in a strategic position, ready to unleash a hail of bullets on the unsuspecting birds. At first glance, it seemed like success was inevitable. Hundreds of emus clustered together, pecking at the crops and completely unaware of the ambush being prepared. As the soldiers opened fire, the birds scattered. What had appeared to be an easy target turned into a chaotic flurry of movement. The emus ran in all directions, their long legs carrying them quickly across the fields. Despite firing dozens of rounds, the soldiers managed to kill only a handful of birds. The rest disappeared into the surrounding scrubland, leaving behind a trail of dust and bewildered soldiers. The emu's agility and speed were far greater than anyone had anticipated. These were not lumbering creatures waiting to be picked off. They were swift, evasive, and surprisingly coordinated. To make matters worse, the rugged terrain of Western Australia worked in the emu's favor. The vast, open fields and scattered vegetation provided ample opportunities for the birds to escape or blend into their surroundings. Undeterred by the initial failure, the soldiers regrouped and attempted a new approach. They mounted one of the machine guns onto a truck, hoping that the added mobility would give them an advantage. With the vehicle in motion, they could pursue the emus and fire at them simultaneously. The idea seemed promising in theory, but in practice, it proved disastrous. The rough terrain made it nearly impossible to aim accurately while driving, and the truck itself struggled to keep up with the nimble birds. The operation devolved into a farcical chase, with the soldiers firing wildly as the emus darted out of range. For every small success, there were multiple setbacks. The soldiers would occasionally manage to corner a group of emus and take out a few, but these moments were rare and fleeting. More often than not, the birds would outsmart their pursuers, splitting into smaller groups and leading the soldiers on fruitless chases across the countryside. The emus displayed an uncanny ability to evade capture, almost as if they understood the stakes of the conflict. As the days turned into weeks, the soldiers began to feel the weight of their mission. The physical demands of the campaign were grueling, with long hours spent traversing the harsh landscape under the blazing sun. The mental toll was equally significant. They had come to Western Australia expecting a swift and decisive victory, only to find themselves outmaneuvered by a flock of birds. The situation became a source of frustration and, eventually, embarrassment. Reports of the operation began to reach the media, and the public reaction was less than sympathetic. The idea of the Australian military struggling against emus struck many as absurd, and newspapers were quick to mock the campaign. Headlines like "Emus outwit machine gunners" turned the operation into a national joke, further demoralizing the soldiers on the ground. The emus, meanwhile, continued their onslaught on the farmlands. Their numbers remained largely undiminished, and their impact on the crops was as devastating as ever. For the farmers, The situation was a bitter disappointment. They had placed their hopes in the military, only to watch the operation falter at every turn. The damage to their livelihoods persisted, and many began to question whether the intervention had been worth the effort. Major GPW Meredith, who led the campaign, later reflected on the challenges his team faced. He spoke with a mix of admiration and frustration about the emu's resilience, describing them as extraordinary birds with remarkable speed and endurance. He recounted how the emus would often adopt evasive tactics, scattering in different directions to confuse their attackers. Even when a group was successfully targeted, the birds' tough plumage and strong bodies often absorbed bullets, rendering the attacks ineffective. By the end of the operation, the soldiers had expended thousands of rounds of ammunition with little to show for their efforts. Estimates suggest that only a few hundred emus were killed, a negligible dent in a population that numbered in the tens of thousands. The campaign was quietly called off, and the soldiers withdrew, leaving the farmers to deal with the emu invasion on their own. Despite the failure, the Great Emu War became a story of resilience, though not in the way anyone had intended. The emus emerged as unlikely victors, their survival a testament to their adaptability and the unpredictability of nature. For the military, the operation served as a humbling reminder of the limits of human control over the natural world. And for the farmers, it was a bitter chapter in their ongoing struggle to carve out a living in one of the toughest environments on Earth. The legacy of the campaign would endure, not as a tale of triumph, but as one of folly. It was a moment in history when the might of machine guns was pitted against the ingenuity of birds, and the birds won. As the weeks of the campaign dragged on, it became increasingly clear that the emus had outmatched their human adversaries. The soldiers, armed with machine guns and bolstered by military tactics, had underestimated the resilience and cunning of these flightless birds. What had begun as an operation to protect farmlands had turned into a battle of frustration, with every attempted ambush or direct assault ending in disappointment. The emus were simply too agile, too numerous, and too clever to be subdued by human intervention. Reports from the battlefield painted a picture of chaos. The emus moved in erratic patterns, scattering the moment they detected danger. Their ability to evade gunfire became legendary among the soldiers, who often remarked that the birds seemed to know exactly when and where to flee. Even when the military managed to corner a flock, the results were rarely effective. The machine guns, designed for war, proved ill-suited for targeting individual birds that could sprint away at incredible speeds. Attempts to adapt to the emu's tactics only deepened the absurdity of the campaign. The soldiers, led by Major Meredith, experimented with mounting a machine gun on the back of a truck, hoping to chase the birds down while firing. The rugged terrain of Western Australia quickly turned this plan into a fiasco. The truck bounced and jolted over the uneven ground, making it nearly impossible to aim with any accuracy. On one occasion, the vehicle even broke down mid-pursuit, leaving the emus to escape unscathed. The soldiers were left stranded, their frustration mounting as they realized how futile their efforts had become. While the emus evaded their attackers, the damage to the crops continued unabated. Farmers watched helplessly as the birds trampled their fields, feasting on wheat and destroying fences meant to keep them out. The emus, seemingly undeterred by the sporadic attacks, grew bolder. Large groups of birds would move from farm to farm, leaving devastation in their wake. For the farmers, this wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a financial disaster. Already struggling with low wheat prices and the economic strains of the Great Depression, they were now losing entire harvests to these relentless intruders. As the campaign wore on, public perception began to shift. Initially, there had been sympathy for the farmers and support for the military intervention. But as news of the operation's failures reached the public, it became a subject of ridicule. Newspapers across Australia reported on the Great Emu War with a tone of amusement, highlighting the absurdity of a nation deploying its army against birds and losing. Cartoonists and commentators had a field day with the story. Images of soldiers running from emus or firing wildly into empty fields became popular, cementing the campaign's reputation as a farce. For the military, This public ridicule was an unwelcome blow to their credibility. The soldiers involved in the operation had been professionals, many of them veterans of World War I, and they were now the subject of national mockery. Major Meredith, in particular, bore the brunt of the criticism, though he would later defend his actions by praising the birds' tenacity and resilience. Despite the mounting embarrassment, the military made a final push to salvage the operation. More ambushes were planned, and additional ammunition was used in an attempt to bring the emu population under control. But the results were the same. The emus continued to outmaneuver the soldiers, scattering into smaller groups and retreating to the dense scrub whenever they sensed danger. The cost of the campaign, both in resources and morale, far outweighed any tangible success. By December 1932, the government decided to abandon the operation altogether. Official records indicate that only a few hundred emus were killed during the entire campaign, a negligible dent in a population that likely numbered over 20,000. The withdrawal of the military marked the end of the Great Emu War, leaving the farmers to deal with the problem on their own. For the farmers, the campaign's failure was a bitter pill to swallow. They had placed their faith in the government and the military, hoping for a solution to a problem that was threatening their livelihoods. Instead, they were left with a story of folly and incompetence, while the emus continued to roam their fields unabated. Some farmers resorted to traditional hunting methods, while others sought compensation from the government for their losses. In the end, the emus emerged as the clear victors. Their ability to evade capture and survive in such harsh conditions was a testament to their adaptability and resilience. The campaign, which had aimed to eliminate them, instead cemented their place in history as a symbol of nature's unpredictability and power. For the soldiers, the Great Emu War became a humbling experience. Major Meredith, reflecting on the operation, acknowledged the challenges his team had faced. He described the emus as formidable opponents, noting their speed, strength, and uncanny ability to evade gunfire. His comments, while intended to highlight the birds' resilience, also underscored the futility of the campaign and the hubris of believing that military force could easily solve such a problem. The Great Emu War remains a unique and often humorous chapter in Australian history. It is a story of human determination met with nature's defiance, where the enemy proved to be far more resourceful than anyone had anticipated. While it may have been a failure for the military and a frustration for the farmers, it was an undeniable triumph for the emus, whose unyielding spirit turned them into unlikely heroes in a battle they were never meant to fight. The Great Emu War, though a resounding failure from a military standpoint, left a legacy far beyond the fields of Western Australia. It became a story told with a mix of humor and incredulity, symbolizing the unpredictability of life and the limitations of human control over the natural world. What started as a desperate bid to save crops from destruction ended as a cautionary tale of hubris, a historical oddity that continues to fascinate and amuse people decades later. For the farmers directly involved, the war's legacy was bittersweet. They had hoped that the intervention of the Australian military would bring relief from the emu invasion, but the operation's failure left them to face the ongoing challenges alone. Many turned to traditional methods of dealing with the birds, employing hunters to cull emu populations or constructing sturdier fences to protect their crops. Over time, they adapted to coexist with the emus, recognizing the birds as an inevitable part of the environment rather than an adversary to be eradicated. The government's role in the debacle also became a point of contention. The decision to deploy soldiers with machine guns against a flock of birds was seen by many as an overreaction, one that exposed a lack of understanding of the problem's complexity. Critics argued that the resources spent on the operation could have been better used to support the farmers through other means, such as financial aid or investment in more effective agricultural infrastructure. The government's embarrassment over the campaign was palpable, and officials were reluctant to speak of it in the years that followed. For the emus themselves, the war was a victory in every sense. They not only survived but also cemented their place in history as symbols of resilience and adaptability. The emu, already a unique and iconic part of Australia's wildlife, became a figure of both national pride and irony. It is perhaps fitting that this bird, which features prominently on Australia's coat of arms alongside the kangaroo, should emerge triumphant in a conflict against human intervention. The broader implications of the Great Emu War extend beyond its immediate context. At its core, the story highlights the delicate balance between human activity and the natural world. The conflict arose from a series of interconnected factors: the expansion of farmland into emu habitats, the economic pressures of the Great Depression, and the reliance on military force as a solution to a problem rooted in environmental dynamics. These elements combined to create a situation that was as absurd as it was instructive, demonstrating the unintended consequences of human efforts to dominate nature. In the decades since the war, the story has taken on a life of its own. It has been retold in countless articles, documentaries, and even comedy sketches, often with an emphasis on its more humorous aspects. The image of soldiers with machine guns chasing after birds is inherently comical, and the campaign's failure adds a layer of irony that makes it irresistible as a subject of satire. Yet beneath the humor lies a deeper reflection on the limitations of human ingenuity and the unpredictable power of nature. For Australians, the Great Emu War has become a beloved part of the nation's cultural history. It is a story that encapsulates the unique character of Australia, with its vast, untamed landscapes and wildlife that often defies human expectations. The tale of the emu's triumph over the military resonates as a reminder of the country's rugged spirit and its ability to find humor in adversity. It is also a testament to the enduring appeal of stories that blend the absurd with the profound, offering lessons in humility while providing entertainment. Internationally, the Great Emu War has garnered interest as one of history's strangest conflicts. It is often cited alongside other peculiar military endeavors, such as the Battle of Cairnsebes or the Pig War, as an example of how human ambition can lead to unexpected and often ludicrous outcomes. The story's universal themes, struggle, failure, and the persistence of nature, have given it an appeal that transcends borders, making it a favorite among history enthusiasts and casual readers alike. In more recent years, the story of the Great Emu War has even inspired creative reinterpretations. It has been the subject of novels, plays, and even video games, each adding its own twist to the tale while staying true to its core elements. These adaptations often emphasize the humor and absurdity of the conflict, but they also serve as a reminder of its underlying message, that nature, for all its beauty and chaos, cannot be easily tamed. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Great Emu War is its role as a cautionary tale. It serves as a reminder of the need for thoughtful, sustainable approaches to environmental challenges. The conflict between the farmers and the emus was not simply a battle between humans and birds. It was a reflection of the broader tensions that arise when human activity disrupts natural ecosystems. The failure of the military campaign underscores the importance of understanding these dynamics and working within them, rather than attempting to impose solutions through brute force. As the story of the Great Emu War continues to be told, it remains a source of both laughter and reflection. It is a chapter in history that defies conventional narratives, offering a glimpse into a world where humans, with all their technology and ingenuity, were outmatched by a flock of birds. It is a story of resilience, adaptation, and the enduring power of nature, reminding us that even the most unexpected events can leave a lasting mark on our collective memory. The emus, unbothered by the chaos they left in their wake, still roam the Australian outback, a living testament to their victory. And for those who hear their story, the Great Emu War stands as a uniquely Australian tale, one that captures the humor, struggle, and indomitable spirit of a land and its people.